Welcome back, everybody, to more from the Stabilize. I'm here today with Blake. How are we doing, Blake?
I'm good. I'm finally here.
It's finally back. Blake's been out of the picture for a couple of days, and so our content has slowed, but hopefully we can get back onto one a day. No promises, though. Obviously, Worlds format is a difficult format to master, and that can be proved by the deck we're going to profile today, Blake, Gardevoir Sylveon.
Yeah, I've been wanting this deck to work even before Worlds format. It's been pretty tough for it. I think now that all these damage modifiers are gone and some of the decks that gave it trouble having a bit of a rougher time, I think there should be time for this to shine, but we'll see. Needs a little bit of fine-tuning.
Yeah, there's definitely work to be done, but hey, it's your deck. I'll let you run through it. Off you go.
Yeah, alright, so with the Pokemon line, obviously the main dude, the main Sheila, is the Gardevoir Sylveon. We play 3 of these. I'm not sure whether or not we should play 4 yet. I feel like 3 is enough to start with it. I mean, there's only one bad Pokemon to start with on the entire deck, so out of the 6 basics that we play, it's not very many, but so we're going to be mulliganing a few times, but that's okay. This is the main dude. We're just going to be using Fairy Song to accelerate early and then applying some pressure whilst keeping our opponents at bay with Fairy Charms and healing with Kaleidostorm, with shuffling those energies around.
Yeah, Kaleidostorm seems like a really powerful attack in a GX heavy format. 150 is a really good amount to be doing, to be hitting those tag teams, and the fact that you can move your energy around to protect Gardevoirs that might be at risk of being knocked out is really powerful. But the thing that I really like about Gardevoir is its Magical Miracle GX. 200 damage is a really good amount of damage to be doing. It knocks out lots of things that aren't tag teams. And with Kaleidostorm and a couple of cheeky Fairy Songs in the late game, you can very easily take a big knockout and then shuffle your opponent's hand into their deck if you've managed to get 6 energy onto that Gardevoir. So it's got lots of potential.
Yeah, don't need reset stamp if you can pull off a big magical miracle and it does its job all for you. Don't need to play too many copies of that.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
We'll get ourselves into the next part of the deck, which is a bit of a early draw power and also a way to activate our Lieutenant Surge so that we can start playing more supporters as we play a 2/2 Mismagius line. This has probably been in like the first build since people started figuring out how to try and build this. I think with a greens build, which is what this deck is running, you just you need this extra draw power to get the other cards. Greens just isn't enough to get you everything, so you need to combine it with like an early Mismagius or 2 just to get the ball rolling, because once the deck gets rolling, you don't really give up prize cards. So, I mean, that's the plan at least. So.
Yeah, and the fact that Mismagius gives up a prize card in lots of decks is a big deal, but with Gardevoir Sylveon, since you've got such a bulky GX that is unlikely to be one-shot by anything in the format, like realistically the only thing that can get close is Pikarom with 2 Electro Powers, but you're unlikely to be losing lots of Pokemon at a quick rate regardless. So if you're able to give up a prize early, just to get yourself some consistency, and then set your Gardevoir Sylveon up, I'm sure you'd be happy to do that.
I mean, you're even happy to lose 1 because, of course, like, you pop the 2 Mismagius, you lose a Gardevoir, and then they're down to 1 prize. So unless your opponent's playing Bucephalon, they're going to have to play like an 8 prize game, which is really awkward.
Yeah, and that's the big benefit of this card for sure.
Yeah, it's not like you're really giving up any prizes at all when they're going to have to take 2 knockouts on a Gardevoir to finish the game. And of course, just to round out the deck, we've also got like a tech attacker, an alternate GX attack user in Xerneas GX. This card's pretty interesting. It's got that the old snipe attack from the Manectric EX back in the day from Fan Enforcers, just 2020 for a colorless, which is pretty good. It can help fix some math against some of our matchups here, like Bucephalon. I believe I used it in one of our videos to put 20s down on Bucephalon until they're both in Kaleidostorm range, which can be pretty relevant if you've got the time to do that. But mainly it's here for the big Sanctuary GX, so if your Gardevoirs are taking some hits and you're moving them around and making sure that even if they're getting hit through their Fairy Charms and the like, that they're not getting one shot Eventually you can just pivot into the Xerneas GX and then declare Sanctuary GX, heal all your tag team, knock out your opponent's active.
Yeah, and the 3 energy cost isn't even that big of a deal when you've got Gardevoir and Sylveon in play, because you can just Kaleidostorm or Fairy Song onto the Xerneas in order to get that Sanctuary GX attack off and completely rid your board of damage. So it can be a really big swing card. Your opponent misses a 1-shot, or maybe they miss out on a 2-hit by 10 or 20 damage due to some of the item cards that we're playing, and then all of that damage is removed, and suddenly you're in the box set.
Yeah, and I think like as soon as you get the 3 energy into play, you really shouldn't be missing attacks with this deck, because like as long as you use your Kaleidostorms and your energy switching cards properly, probably shouldn't be losing energy off of an attacking Pokemon, really.
Yeah, the problem that we're going to have obviously is that there are so few of them that you might find it a little bit tough to get into them when you need them. But with the draw from Mismagius and some of our items, hopefully we should be able to set up a couple of Gardevoir Sylveon at some point.
So that's our Pokemon line, very bare bones, obviously, but majority of deck is this trainer pile here.
Big pile of trainers.
Just the essence of Green's exploration builds. So obviously it's a Greens build. We're playing 4 greens.
Yep.
So this does everything for us in this deck. It gets us custom catches, our healing cards, our stadiums, our fairy charms, our ball search cards, our Dusk Stone, even Pokegear to get into other supporters. It just does it all. So as long as we can get a draw into these early, then deck runs really smooth.
Yeah, and the best thing about greens is obviously the only Pokemon in our deck that has an ability is Mismagius, and if we don't want it to be in play, it doesn't have to be. We can knock it out, draw some cards, and use greens anyway.
Yep. Now, obviously, there's not always going to be turns where greens is going to get it all for you. Sometimes you need 3 cards to just make it whole, and for that, you're trying to amass like a large hand size, so the perfect supporter to sort of back that up is we play 2 copies of Erikas to sort of help us out with that.
Yeah, and Erikas can be really, really strong in those second and third turns of the game. Maybe you've missed a green, or you're just missing a card or 2 here or there. Since our opponent is likely to be playing lots of Pokemon, lots of the decks that are in format at the moment fill their bench up, Erikas is relatively reliable in getting you 5 or 6 cards. So a very, very good supporter that's starting to see a lot of play in the decks that we're testing.
Yeah, it's so strong now. It's so hard to avoid just overbenching in this format. There's not really even a case where you control it unless you draw exceptionally well. But most of the decks that need bench Pokemon to function, so you just can't avoid it now. So you're always going to be able to draw like 4 to 5 cards as long as you play this game. And to follow this up, we also have another way to apply pressure. We have 2 copies of Mina, which can be used to accelerate energy and get ourselves a turn 2 Kaleidostorm, which is really important.
Yeah, and this is why Magical Miracle isn't that hard to pull off. Obviously, Fairy Song, if you are going second, you attach an energy, Fairy Song puts 2 more on the field. A Mina and attachment, you're up to 5. So realistically, on turn 3 and 4, depending on where your energy is and how you've moved it around, you could potentially be looking at a big Magical Miracle GX. But Mina just really smooths over some of the problems that this deck has with attaching energy. Maybe you don't want to attach all of your energy to the same Gardevoir. Maybe you've moved some off with Kaleidostorm in the previous turn, thinking it was going to be knocked out, and it wasn't. And Mina is going to enable you to get back into those attacks that you need to use to keep the pressure up, make sure that you're still doing the right stuff.
Yeah, it's such a basic card, but it really does smooth out a lot of the issues you can run yourself into with this deck.
I love that you can run yourself into.
So lastly, we just have 2 one-off. So we have a Lieutenant Surge. So once the Mismagius is popped, we can then go into Lieutenant Surge and we can start playing 2 of these great supporters at once. So we can play a Greens and then we can also play a Mina or an Erikas to follow it up with, and then we can get like some really insanely powerful turn.
Yeah, when you've got access to Lieutenant Surge, then suddenly you have lots and lots of options. Obviously, you need to make sure that you've played Surge first, but Lieutenant Surge and Green in hand, or Lieutenant Surge and Mismagius on the field, can turn itself into a really big play very quickly. So it's always something to be watching out for these kind of bulky builds. They can very easily just pop off 3 supporters, draw a hand of 6, and attach energy with Mina, and off they go.
And yeah, absolutely. But last we just got a Cynthia just to round out some extra draw support. And you always need a shuffle draw supporter just to make sure. You know, it just gives you outs to like certain lose conditions, like deck outs and stuff like that. Sometimes you can mash a really large hand and then realize you've gone a bit too far with your drawing.
Yeah.
Or
Oh no.
sometimes you may have Erikas and drawn into all your fairies, so you can't fairy song and stuff like that. So you need to actually have extra energy in deck for stuff like that. You're not able to hit Minas because you've got too many fairies. So you need to shuffle them back in. All those sorts of situations, Cynthia can come in.
It's a good safety net just to make sure that nothing's going to go too horribly wrong. And, you know, Cynthia's a pretty good card. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
it's never a bad supporter.
yeah, you're happy to play it.
So that rounds out the supporter line. Next we're up to our trainer cards.
It's our
So
big
we-
stack.
There, a big stack. So to start off with, it's pretty much the staple of this format now that Guzma's gone. It's 4 custom catches, which basically just turns each of our greens explorations into a Lysand, plus something else maybe if you're already holding one.
Yeah, well, that's another use for that Lieutenant Surge. You can be sitting on nothing and then Lieutenant Surge into like double greens, and you've got Gust with Custom Catcher, and you've got other effects that are going to stop your opponent from being able to catch up. Custom Catcher is obviously a very, very powerful card, and until such a time as a better Gust effect comes into the format, this card is going to be a staple in anything that isn't coloured red, I guess.
Yeah, even decks that don't run greens are running this card. That's how desperate we are for the ability to switch any opponent's Pokemon we want into the acquisition.
Yeah.
It's just that important.
It's too good.
Next, to add even more consistency into this build, we have 4 copies of Pokegear. This just helps us find whatever supporter we desire for each specific turn. Obviously, greens isn't going to be perfect for every turn like we talked about before. Just like in the same way you might be holding an Erikas, but it's turn 1 and your opponent has like 2 Pokemon in play because that's how many they started with, and you're not really happy about that, so you might want to Pokegear for trying to desperately hit that greens on the turn 1.
Yeah, Pokegear, since you've got those kind of awkward 2 of or 1 of counts as well, sometimes Pokegear can get you into them, ready for you to use them next turn. And the good thing about Pokegear as well is it's another out, just in case you want to have that big Surge turn. If you've got no supporters in your hand apart from Surge, it can be a bit concerning. But Pokegear just gives you another card where you're able to draw and see 7 more, maybe find the supporter that you were looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we get to our ball search. So we play 3 Cherish Ball. This hits the majority of our deck. This hits all of our GX boys. And yeah, so that's basically the bulk of the deck. And for whatever this Cherish Ball doesn't hit, it's hit by 3 copies of Mysterious Treasure, which hits our Mismagius line.
Yeah, so that's the 50% of the deck is searchable by Cherish Ball, and the other 50% is searchable by Mysterious Treasure. So you're never going to be short of finding a Pokemon. You just got to make sure that you've got the right ball search on the right turn.
Yeah, that's why green search is so important, because there's going to be lots of times where you want a Gardevoir, but you have a Mysterious Treasure, and vice versa with the Misdreavus. And obviously, you know, we're playing 4 psychic types. But to help get those out, you obviously have the Dusk Stones to get into those Mismagius straight away. So you don't need all of the Mysterious Treasures, so you don't need to worry about having all 3 available. With the Dusk Stones, you can get into those Mismagius real easy, and as early as the first turn, start drawing cards.
Yeah, Mysterious Treasure usually going to be helping pick up the Misdreavus, because that's probably the hardest part to hit out of this entire combination. Dusk Stone is a prime greens target in the early game. You just grab that Dusk Stone, and it essentially says draw 7 cards on it, which is really, really good. Obviously, the cost of giving your opponent a prize, but in the early game, especially with such a bulky tag team, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, and there's always cool plays you can do on the first turn, where sometimes greens will just get you the Mysterious Treasure and the Dusk Stone. As long as you have a card to discard with the Mysterious Treasure, you can just get yourself a Mismagius and draw cards like that.
Yep.
So it's basically a nice lily, but just disguised as a green. So,
Yeah, it's just you just have to. It's a lily with extra steps.
yeah, and thins out more cards. So now we've got more of our utility cards. So we play 3 copies of the brand new Great Potion. So this is a card that we absolutely need for our non-GX matchup against, say, like Giratina's, Baby Blacephalon, Zapdoses, non-GX Zeraroras, and the like.
Yeah, anything that's going to be looking to half hit you.
Yeah, it's really difficult to deal with these decks. If they can do 130, then they really put you in a tough spot, because none of the fairy charms affect these non-GXs, so we have to have another way to deal with them. So if we can buy a turn with a Great Potion, and then switch into another one, switch into another Gardevoir, and take a half hit, Great Potion, buy a turn, suddenly we can actually start catching up on the price trade with those decks, and maybe win it out.
Yeah, can you just remind me the exact number on Great Potion? It's 50, correct?
Yeah, so it's heal 50 from your active GX Pokemon.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of very specific text on this card. And unfortunately, it's like the best heal card we have access to now that Max Pot's gone.
Now that Max Potion's gone, the best that we have to hope for is 50 from GXs. But in this deck, it does exactly what you want it to do. I mean, Giratina's going to hit into this for 130. You can heal 50 off and give yourself another couple of turns to get going. So it means that the trade turns from 2 for 3, as in you're taking 2 prizes and they're taking 3 after 2 turns. Suddenly it's a 3 for 3 trade. It's not so bad.
And obviously you can weave this in with in your greens targets, because you only need one, it's only one card to heal 50 and avoid it. You can grab custom catches with it on your greens and target down, like say this is Giratina, you're up against you grab your potion and then you grab a custom catcher, and then you can target a Malamar and knock that out, and then they swing back into you, you go into another one, and you can knock out the Giratina, and maybe you can break the cycle of Giratina loops, which is really good in this format.
It's probably one of the best ways to deal with Giratina without actively teching for it, is to just try and stop them from being useful. And Giant Potion, which ironically is not actually that giant, does the job.
Oh no, just great potion.
Great, sorry.
No, did I say giant?
Oh, maybe it was translated as Giant Potion before. I don't know. Maybe it's just too late in the afternoon. Obviously there's probably a few smart cookies at home that obviously know of the other healing card that's in format, which is Mixed Herb. It does take up like the full 4 slots, and you need to play 2 at once for it to work. Obviously, like, that's the main reason right now why I'm playing Great Potion over the Mixed Herbs. The Mixed Herbs does heal for 90 and remove special conditions, which is really strong. But at this point, I haven't been able to find the space to either fit both, or honestly, if I'm going to run one over the other at this point, I think Great Potion is the one, because it does less spot. It does the job,
It's also much easier to weave in your turns with greens, otherwise you have to dedicate an entire turn of greens into grabbing heal for 90, which doesn't sound great to me. I'd rather go halfway there with the heal and then grab something else useful.
It would also mean if you played the Mixed Herbs, you'd have 8 cards that you'd have to have 2 of to play. So I think the Giant Potion does the job. It does exactly what you need to do. Stops those half hitters from half hitting, and gives you an opportunity to start taking knockouts yourself.
Yeah. And moving on, we play 3 copies of Tag Switch. Now, at this point, I feel like 3 copies might be a bit heavy. That's one of the cards I might be able to cut to try and fit either a fourth Great Potion, or maybe one other tech card, maybe a basic Dark type Hooper to help deal with that tricky Malamar matchup, which has been plaguing all of our testing decks.
And seems very good. And I mean, the next matchup that you'll see on the channel will actually be Gardevoir Sylveon against Ultra Malamar, with those Giratinas. So it'll be interesting to see whether the stuff we're talking about actually comes to fruition here.
Yeah. Now, obviously, this tag switches are really good if you ever Kaleidostorm and things don't turn out as you expect them to, because a lot of predicting what your opponent's going to do goes into how you move these energies around. So sometimes you get it wrong. And it's also great for whipping out a surprise was it magical? What's
Magical
the
Miracle.
GX? Magical Miracle. I knew the magical part. I was just trying to remember what the second one was. Magical Miracle.
Magic.
Magic. The Magical Miracle GX. You can get that really out of nowhere. So you get like a tag switch, an attachment, and a Mina. Suddenly, like a 2-energy Gardevoir declaring the GX attacking. Your opponent sometimes just is not ready for stuff.
Yeah, you've not planned for it, it can just happen to you, and suddenly you're sitting there with no hand and no attacker, and you're like, what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah, and if your opponent's not playing something like a Jirachi, then it's going to be tough pickings for them to try and get out of that scenario.
Certainly will.
Now we get to our stadiums. So right now at this point we're playing 2 copies of Power Plant and a copy of Wondrous Labyrinth. Wondrous Labyrinth is just such a powerhouse. If there's ever a point where you're making a pink deck and this card isn't in it, I think you're making a huge mistake.
Very powerful.
It makes turns so awkward for your opponent, and it pretty much forces them to find a replacement stadium on any given turn they want to do anything. Even though stadiums are super prevalent, and almost every deck in this format is playing 3 or more stadiums, this card is still worth it. There's even the Reset Hole Marshadow, and this card still needs to be played. It's just that strong. If you buy even a single turn by making a turn awkward for your opponent, sometimes they just forget. Honestly, you can play through a very long turn, the board state looks tricky, and then suddenly they go to do their 1-energy attack with their Pokemon after doing all their actions, and they go, and then you just tap the stadium and they're like, oh no. Wondrous Labyrinth, I just wasted my entire turn.
Yep, I just sat there and did all my things and forgot that Wondrous Labyrinth is a card. And since it doesn't affect you, it's not going to make any difference. You're still going to Collider Storm for 3, and your opponent's going to be sitting there floundering, trying to find the extra energy. The other thing that it also does is it makes your opponent commit to what they're attacking with. So like they want to attack with a Reshizard or a Pikarom, they have to like really pile on the energy onto their attacker, which means that they're not attaching to anyone else. And if that Wondrous Labyrinth stays in play and you manage to get a knockout, it's going to be a long time before they get an attacker ready to take a knockout on Gardevoir.
Yeah, and especially decks like Pikarom, they have very specific like energy peaks of like what they can relatively achieve during a certain turn. Like a turn 2 full blitz is very, very tricky, well, nigh undoable with turn 1 going second, it's impossible to do if you can't find a replacement stadium with Wondrous Labyrinth in play, which is crazy. That's strong enough as it is. Force a 5th energy on a Reshizard, so they need to world it twice to be able to actually attack with it. Second turn, which
and even
is,
then, these guys, even when they're attaching all these energy, they're still not taking knockouts, which is the key.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like our other stadium here, Power Plant. Honestly, if you've been watching our content, we haven't featured it yet, but if you've been watching our content, you're obviously aware that new Mewtwo GX is an insanely powerful card. I think it's one of those cards it's almost meta-defining. It's just that strong. So Power Plant right now is our stadium of choice. Now. For me, personal debate between Power Plant and Lysander Labs, just because the matchups where we're not relying on our Fairy Charms are actually the ones where Lysander Labs is really good against Malamar with their Escape Boards and Spell Tag, which can be very tricky. They're really good at fixing math for our opponents, so shutting them off is really useful. So lots of debate which one we think is more necessary. At the present time, it is the Power Plant.
Yeah, Power Plant can just completely shut off that Mew deck, completely eradicate it. I mean, there's nothing that you can do when your ability is shut off, and it's like Zoroark but on crack, really. Like the effect of Power Plant in that matchup, because it's not like they can't just draw and then they just attack for 120. They just can't do anything. So the fact that you can turn off that massive attacker and force them to find another way to get knockouts is really, really big. But like you said, Lysander Labs is really important. There's lots of like scary little one prize attackers that are going to be doing stuff that'll annoy you, like Shedinja. You can get rid of those frustrating Shedinjas and make sure that you're taking prizes. The options are there, but hey, You could play Viridian, you could play anything. Like there's heaps of support stadiums that would go well with Gardevoir, but these two are probably the top two.
Yeah, and honestly, like the debate between all of those is just basically what you expect to see in like any tournament, or at Worlds. What you expect to see? Do you expect to see a lot of Mew Mew, or do you expect to see more Malamar? Obviously, at this point, it's hard to tell. We're still over a month out until Worlds, well and truly.
It's a long time.
It's very hard to say which one we're going to see more of, but for our testing, we're running with Power Plant.
Sounds good.
So, next up, we have 2 copies of Switch. Early days, I was testing out a 1/1 Drift Beam line, which, if we don't know what it does, it once per turn, you may switch your active Tag Team GX Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. So
that seems very
useful.
good.
Very useful, just to pivot between Gardy GXs. There's a problem with that though, and that's that once you evolve into Drifblim, you shut off your access to greens for the rest of the deck, for the rest of the game.
Yeah,
so,
which can be very painful, and especially when you're ultimately doing, like you're investing 2 card slots to infinitely switch, when realistically you're probably only going to need to do it once or maybe twice. So these 2 switch cards are going to do the job, without meaning that your greens is completely unusable. And to add salt into the wounds, you can actually just use greens to get it.
Yeah, which is it's funny. I don't know why at any point why I thought that was better. I think honestly, when I first drafted this list, I thought I could get away with only having played greens like 2 or 3 times, and then evolving into the Drifblim and then saying goodbye to it for the rest of it. But greens is just too important. You can't ever shut that card when you're playing this deck. Now, we get to the real spicy, interesting part now, which can obviously change based on what you expect to see. That's our Fairy Charm count. So, to start with, we play 2 copies of the Fairy Charm. Now, Pikarom is obviously one of the strongest decks going into Worlds format. It didn't lose a lot in terms of its search potential, with Electromagnetic Radar still being very good. It only really lost Nest Ball. Between Radar, Cherish Ball, and Pokemon Communications, it has so much search, and everything else that was strong about the deck stays the same. So it's one of the strongest, which is why we feel like, especially being one of the only decks that also keeps damage modifiers in Electro Power, it's a big threat to one-shotting Gardevoir, so we absolutely need to make sure that that deck can't run wild on our tag teams.
Yeah, and the fact that Pikarom sets up so early as well, like we were saying before, on turn 2 it's very realistic for them to be starting attacking, and like we said, it's one of the only decks that can really push the boundaries of Gardevoir's HP and take a one-shot. So 2 copies not only means that we can protect multiple Gardevoir Sylveon, but it also means that we're more likely to get into it early in that particular matchup, and it's less likely to be prized. So, or at least it's less likely that both are going to be prized. So it gives you those outs there.
Yeah, with no Field Blower and only Farbo, you don't mind just slapping one on the active early, and then seeing if your opponent runs Lysander Labs or not, really.
Yeah.
Because the charm's going to stick no matter what. It just it depends if it works or not. So, yeah, the count makes sense. You just don't want to prize both, otherwise you're in
trouble.
So we play also 1 copy of the Ultra Beast Fairy Charm, which was always in the deck and never misplaced or
there was never a time when Ultra Beast Fairy Charm would have come up, like against Blacephalon, that just ran perfectly anyway and didn't need it. So, pardon me, I was got a bit of
no worries. But yeah, Blacephalon is huge. It's one of those other decks that didn't lose a whole lot of its search potential. All of its very powerful game-winning cards like Beast. Ultra Space is still very strong. Probably one of the best stadiums in the format if you run those Pokemon. So yeah, especially also because of its expandable damage, like Pikarom. It's one of those Pokemon which can 260 mark, as big as the number of that is.
Still achievable. One of the things with Blacephalon that you do need to remember, though, if you are playing the Fairy Charm for Ultra Beast, it doesn't actually work on the Naganadel. It only works for the GXs. So Naganadel will still be able to chip away at you for 80. so that could be frustrating for a couple of minutes as you Kaleidostorm it.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's why we need cards like Great Potion, so that those tactics don't work on us as a fleet. And lastly, to round it out, we have one copy of Fairy Charm ability. As we spoke about with the Mew Mew before, I mean, the card's very strong. It's also got an ability. So rather than shutting it off, sometimes you might just be able to grab the ability charm and shut that off. So I don't think very many... None of the lists I've seen for Mew Mew have been running Lysander Labs. They tend to lean towards whatever stadium the archetypes like built around. If it's the Welder build, they're running the giant oven hearth or whatever they decide to translate it as.
Whatever
I'll never know what the true name of it is.
Big Viridian.
Yep, Big Viridian. But yeah, I haven't seen any of them running Lysander Labs yet, so this card could be very easily gamed against those decks.
Certainly could.
Also, there's other cards like the Xerneas GX, which draws cards. The new one that's coming out can protect your GXs from that card. There's a few ability ones lying around. They aren't as common, which is why we've only got one copy. But it's mainly for the Mew Mew. Yeah,
and like you're usually gonna only realistically need one of these. Anyway, if you're playing up against Blacephalon, for example, you don't care if they kill one of your Gardevoir Sylveon. That's fine, as long as they don't get down to that one prize turn to burst. If you've got one Gardevoir Sylveon with a Fairy Charm Ultra Beast attached to it, there's no realistic way that Blacephalon is winning that game. So seems like it's low, probably not too bad.
As long as you only use the one Mismagius. You can only you give up the one Gardy if it so falls that way, then yeah, just all it only needs to have one Fairy Charm stick, and
exactly.
you can finish that game out.
Exactly. So there's a small amount of them, but they're still very, very powerful.
And lastly, just two super useful utility one-off cards. We have Energy Spinner for our first turn. Obviously, it grabs us our Fairy Energy, so that we can guarantee an attachment off of greens, which is very useful. And going seconds on our first turn, we can grab 3 and not worry about Fairy Energy manual attachments for basically the rest of the game if our hand doesn't get shuffled back in.
Yeah, we're really happy to keep them.
So that's one of those cards the Greens engine has a lot of trouble drawing, which is Energy. So Energy Spinner very useful at fulfilling that role. And lastly, what deck would be complete without a good old reset stamp?
Reset stamp's too good a card to leave out, so we've got to have at least one.
Obviously, we're talking about how we're going to lock all of our opponents but Blacephalon at one prize with Fairy Charms and our last Gardevoir tag team. What better way to help complete that lock by sticking them at one-card hands? So that seems pretty ideal to me.
You can't take knockouts, and you've only got one card to work with whilst I slowly chip away until I win.
Seems fair to me, man.
Seems good.
So that's all of our trainers. So last but not least, we have our energy. Now we play a 3-count line of the Team Up Fairy Energy, and then we play 2 copies of the whatever energy that is.
X and Y.
That's the X and Y Fairy Energy. And we play 2 counts of the Evolutions Fairy Energy.
Is that Evolutions, isn't it?
No, that's
Generations, isn't it?
Generations, yes, Generations, that's the one. It was a little side set. This one is an Evolutions Fairy Energy.
That's an Evolutions one, yep.
And that is a Sun Moon Fairy Energy.
It certainly is. Now, it's really important that you make sure that these energy types are correct, because if you don't, good grief.
Your consistency would be off.
Yep, you won't draw them.
For those who weren't paying attention while we were actually just messing with you, that's 9 Fairy Energy in total.
Yep. So nine's probably going to be enough. Obviously, you're going to be able to search it with Fairy Song.
Probably as low as you can go safely. I'd like to have more, but obviously it's the trainer cards and stuff like that which really drive home the power of this deck, not the energy count. It's just sort of a niceness, a luxury to have more energy.
Exactly.
But unfortunately, we can't really afford it. I'd rather have copies of other cards to fill out the deck list rather than the 10th energy. But if you can, let me know how it works out. Because if it's good enough, then we'll give it a go. But,
I certainly will.
That'll wrap it up for Gardevoir Sylveon. Obviously, the complete list will be in the description if you want your exact counts all in one go. But
Don't say that, Blake. You're gonna make me actually put it in there. Oh no.
But that's the list.
Oh jeez. Well, it's a relatively interesting one, and we're still gonna see it tested against a matchup or two more. But hey, thanks Blake for putting that one together.
No worries.
And thanks everyone for coming along. If you like the content, then click the Sableye in the middle of the screen to subscribe. On the left are some videos that YouTube thinks that you'll like, and on the right is our Unified Minds playlist for more Worlds testing. Don't look in the description, please. Please don't. It'll be embarrassing for me specifically. Anyway.
It was a bluff you weren't supposed to check.
Oh no. Oh no. Anyway, we'll catch you all next time for more from the Sableyes. Don't check the description. Bye.